The Texas sun hung like a forge in the sky, turning the air to glass and the earth to ash. Elijah Boone had been running for 4 days straight, his bare feet cracked and bleeding, his wrists still raw from the iron shackles he'd broken 2 nights prior, using a rock and pure desperation. The chains dangled from his left arm like a metal serpent, clinking with every staggered step. He'd stolen nothing but his own body, and for that, they wanted him dead. Behind him, somewhere in the shimmering heat, the dogs were coming. He could hear them in his mind even when the wind was silent, their snarling breath and the thunder of hooves. Master Caleb Grimshaw's men didn't forgive runaways. They made examples of them, hung them high where the buzzards could feast and the other slaves could see what happened to hope. Elijah stumbled down into a dry ravine, his throat screaming for water that didn't exist. The Pecos River was somewhere to the west, but distance in this hellscape meant nothing. A mile could kill you just as easily as 10. His vision blurred, spots dancing at the edges like black moths. He pressed his back against the crumbling red clay wall and closed his eyes, just for a moment, letting the shade cradle him. That's when he heard it. A cry. High-pitched, desperate, not English, not Spanish either. Elijah's eyes snapped open. His first instinct was to stay hidden, to let whatever drama was unfolding pass him by. He was a fugitive. Getting involved meant exposure. Exposure meant death. What are you thinking about this story? Your opinion is incredibly important to us. Please subscribe, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and let us know if you're enjoying this tale. We truly value your feedback. It helps us create better content for you. But the cry came again, sharper this time, edged with panic that transcended language. He moved before he could stop himself, crawling along the ravine floor toward the sound. The heat pressed down on him like a hand, and his limbs felt heavy as timber, but something deeper than survival pulled him forward. Maybe it was the memory of his own son, sold south 3 years ago. Maybe it was simply that he'd lost so much. One more loss would break him entirely. He rounded a bend and froze. 15 feet ahead, in a wide depression of the ravine floor, a boy was sinking into quicksand. His skin was bronze, his black hair tied back with leather cord. He couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. Comanche, Elijah realized, recognizing the beadwork on the boy's vest. The child's eyes were wide with terror, his small hands clawing at the shifting sand that swallowed him inch by inch. He was already chest-deep. The boy saw Elijah and screamed something in his language, a word that sounded like a plea and a curse all at once. Elijah scanned the ravine, no one else. The boy must have wandered off from his people, chasing a lizard or a rabbit, and stumbled into this death trap. In minutes he'd be gone, pulled under by the earth itself. Every rational thought in Elijah's mind told him to run. This wasn't his fight. The Comanche were dangerous, unpredictable, and if Grimshaw's men found him here, they'd shoot him where he stood. But Elijah had stopped listening to rational thoughts the night he shattered his chains. He moved quickly, searching the ravine for something, anything. His eyes landed on a long branch wedged between 2 rocks. He yanked it free, tested its strength, then dropped to his belly at the edge of the quicksand. The boy was shoulder-deep now, his breathing rapid and shallow. "Easy, boy," Elijah said, his voice cracked and raw. "Easy now. Grab hold." He extended the branch. The boy stared at him, confusion and fear warring in his dark eyes. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the gesture. His small hand shot out and grabbed the wood. Elijah pulled. The quicksand resisted, sucking harder, hungry. His arms burned. The broken chain on his wrist bit into his flesh, drawing fresh blood. He gritted his teeth and pulled harder, digging his feet into the clay wall for leverage. "Come on," he hissed. "Come on, damn you!" The boy thrashed, making it worse. Elijah barked at him, a sharp sound that needed no translation. The boy went still. Elijah pulled again, slow and steady this time, and felt the sand begin to release its grip. Inch by terrible inch, the boy rose. When his chest broke free, Elijah shifted his weight and gave one final heave. The boy came loose with a wet sucking sound and scrambled forward onto solid ground, gasping and sobbing. He was covered head to toe in grey mud, shaking violently. Elijah collapsed beside him, his own body trembling from exertion and dehydration. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The desert wind whispered through the ravine, carrying the scent of sage and dust. The boy sat up slowly, staring at Elijah with wide, unblinking eyes. Then, without a word, he stood and ran. Not toward Elijah, but away, scrambling up the far side of the ravine with the agility of a young antelope. In seconds, he was gone, disappearing into the vast emptiness of the Texas plains. Elijah watched him go, too exhausted to feel anything. He'd just saved a Comanche child, and the boy had fled without so much as a backward glance. He didn't expect gratitude. He didn't expect anything. He'd simply done what his mother had taught him long ago, back in Georgia before the world went to hell. When you see someone drowning, you pull them out. He lay there in the shade of the ravine as the sun climbed higher, turning the sky white with heat. His lips were cracked, his tongue thick in his mouth. He thought about his wife Sarah back on the Grimshaw plantation. He thought about his son, whose name he whispered sometimes in his sleep. He thought about the dogs that would find him eventually, but mostly he thought about water. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time moved strangely in the desert. Elijah drifted in and out of consciousness, his mind conjuring mirages, visions of rivers and rain. Once he thought he heard thunder, but when he opened his eyes, the sky was clear and cruel. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of copper and blood, Elijah accepted that he would die here. It seemed fitting somehow. He'd lived his whole life in chains, and he'd die free, even if freedom meant dying alone in a Texas ravine with broken shackles on his wrist. He closed his eyes and waited for the darkness, but the darkness didn't come. Instead, 3 days later, salvation came thundering from the west. Elijah woke to the sound of drums. At first he thought he was dreaming or dead, or both. But the sound was real, rhythmic and deep, pounding like a heartbeat through the earth. He tried to sit up and found he couldn't. His body was stiff, his muscles locked from days without movement or water. Somehow, impossibly, he was still alive. The drums grew louder. Then came the sound of hooves, dozens of them, shaking the ground. Elijah managed to turn his head, his neck cracking like old wood. They appeared at the top of the ravine like a vision from another world. Comanche warriors, 20 or more, mounted on painted horses that moved like liquid shadow. Their faces were painted with red and black war markings, their spears and lances glinting in the early morning sun. They lined the ridge, silent and still, watching him. Elijah's heart hammered. This was it. They'd found him. Maybe the boy had told them about the black man in the ravine, and they'd come to finish what the Quicksand had started. But then the warriors parted, and a single rider came forward. The man was massive, broad-shouldered and scarred, with long black hair threaded with silver. He wore a headdress of eagle feathers and a breastplate made of bone. His eyes were hard as flint. Behind him, on the same horse, sat the boy Elijah had pulled from the sand. The child's face was clean now, his eyes bright. The chief dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate. He walked down into the ravine, his boots crunching on the dry earth. The other warriors remained motionless, watching. When the chief reached Elijah, he knelt. For a long moment he simply stared, his face unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice deep and resonant, the words incomprehensible to Elijah's ears. An older man descended from the ridge, moving with the careful grace of age. He wore simpler clothes, and his face was weathered like old leather. He knelt beside the chief and spoke in broken English. "Chief Tanaka says you saved his blood, his son, his only son." Elijah tried to speak, but only a croak came out. The interpreter produced a water skin and held it to Elijah's lips. The water was warm and tasted of leather, but it was the sweetest thing Elijah had ever known. He drank greedily until the interpreter pulled it away. "You are dying," the interpreter said simply. "The desert takes what it wants." The chief spoke again, his tone firm. The interpreter translated, "You saved my blood. Now I save yours." Before Elijah could respond, the chief stood and barked orders in Comanche. Two warriors descended into the ravine, lifted Elijah as gently as if he were made of glass, and carried him up to where the horses waited. They laid him across the back of a mare, securing him with leather straps. Through his haze, Elijah managed to whisper, Where are you taking me?" The interpreter mounted his own horse and looked down at him. His expression was unreadable. "To free your people," he said. "Chief Tenaka honors debts." And then they rode, the thunder of hooves swallowing Elijah's questions, carrying him toward a destiny he couldn't yet imagine. The Comanche moved like ghosts across the desert, their horses' hooves barely disturbing the dust. Elijah drifted in and out of consciousness as they rode, the rhythm of the mare beneath him becoming a kind of lullaby. Sometimes he woke to find the sun high overhead, sometimes to darkness thick with stars. Always there was the scent of sage and sweat, the creak of leather, the soft murmur of voices speaking a language he didn't understand. On the second day of riding, they stopped at a hidden spring nestled between two red rock formations. The water bubbled up from somewhere deep in the earth, cold and clear, surrounded by a ring of cottonwood trees that shouldn't have existed in this barren land. The warriors dismounted and began tending to their horses, their movements efficient and practiced. Two women appeared from somewhere, older Comanche women with silver in their hair and knowing eyes. They lifted Elijah from the horse and carried him to the shade of the largest cottonwood. One of them produced a clay bowl filled with something that smelled of herbs and earth. She held it to his lips, and when he hesitated, she spoke sharply in Comanche, a tone that transcended language. It meant, "Drink this, or I'll make you drink it." Elijah drank. The mixture was bitter, coating his throat like medicine. Within minutes, he felt strength returning to his limbs, a warmth spreading through his chest. Whatever they'd given him, it was pulling him back from death's edge. Chief Tanaka approached with his son at his side. The boy stared at Elijah with unabashed curiosity, his dark eyes taking in every detail. The chief knelt and spoke, his voice gentler than before. The interpreter, whose name Elijah had learned was Grey Owl, translated, "Chief Tanaka says his son is called Little Thunder. He was chasing a hawk when he fell into the sand. He thought the earth spirits were angry with him, taking him to the below world. Then you came." Elijah looked at the boy, Little Thunder, who offered him a shy smile. Something twisted in Elijah's chest, a pain that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. The boy was close to the age his own son would have been. "I didn't think about it," Elijah said, his voice still rough. I couldn't let him die," Grey Owl translated, and the chief nodded slowly. He spoke again, longer this time, his hand resting on his son's shoulder. "The chief says in Comanche way, a life debt is sacred. You gave his son breath. Now he owes you breath. He asks what you want. Gold, horses, safe passage to Mexico." Elijah thought about it. About Sarah, still in chains back at the Grimshaw plantation. About the 50 other souls suffering under Caleb Grimshaw's cruelty. About his son, somewhere in the deep south, whose face he could barely remember anymore. "There's a place," Elijah said slowly, 2 days east of here. A slave camp. Grimshaw's camp, 50 people, maybe more, all of them in chains. He met the chief's eyes. "If you really want to pay a debt, free them." Grey Owl's eyebrows rose, but he translated faithfully. The chief's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. He stood and walked away, Little Thunder following close behind. For a long moment he stared out at the desert, his back to them all. Then he turned and spoke, his voice carrying across the camp. The warriors stopped what they were doing and listened. When he finished, they responded with a shout, raising their spears to the sky. Grey Owl looked at Elijah with something that might have been respect. The chief says it will be done. At dawn, we ride east. He says no man should live in chains, not even the black white man." "Black white man?" Elijah asked. "That's what we call your people. Not quite white, not quite Comanche. Somewhere in between. But the chief says you have Comanche heart. You see someone drowning, you pull them out. That is the way." That night, Elijah slept properly for the first time in weeks. The Comanche women had given him blankets and food, rabbit meat roasted over a fire with wild onions and something that tasted like honey. He ate until his stomach hurt, then lay beneath the cottonwood and watched the stars wheel overhead. Little Thunder came and sat beside him, chattering in Comanche, pointing at the constellations. Elijah didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. The boy was telling him stories, the way all boys do when they found someone willing to listen. "You remind me of someone," Elijah said quietly. "Someone I lost." Little Thunder tilted his head, not comprehending. Elijah pulled out something he'd kept hidden in his shirt, a small piece of cloth with faded stitching. Sarah had made it, a crude drawing of their family done in thread. Elijah, Sarah, and their son holding hands. He showed it to Little Thunder, pointing to the small figure. "My boy, about your age. They took him, sold him south, where the cotton grows tall and the sun burns hotter than here." Little Thunder studied the cloth seriously, then reached out and touched the stitched figure with one small finger. He said something soft in Comanche, then patted Elijah's hand and walked back to his father's fire. Grey Owl appeared out of the darkness and sat down beside Elijah. "The boy says your son has strong spirit. He says spirits don't die when bodies are taken. They wait. They find their way home." Elijah's throat tightened. "That's a nice thought. Comanche believe it. We lose children too, to disease, to war, to the white eyes who take them for their schools. But spirits are patient. They know the way." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Somewhere, a coyote howled. The fire crackled and popped. "Why is the chief doing this?" Elijah asked finally. "It's dangerous. Grimshaw has guns. He has men. The chief could lose warriors, could lose his own life." Grey Owl looked at him, his weathered face half lit by firelight. "Chief Tanaka's first son died 5 winters ago. Fever took him. Little Thunder is all he has left. When you pulled that boy from the sand, you didn't just save a child. You saved the chief's future, his blood, his name. In Comanche way, that debt is bigger than danger, bigger than death." He stood, brushing dust from his leggings. "Sleep now. Tomorrow we ride to war, and you, black white man, will see what happens when Comanche pay their debts." Dawn broke cold and sharp, the desert air crisp enough to burn lungs. The Comanche camp stirred to life in near silence, warriors checking weapons and tightening saddle straps. They moved with the efficiency of men who'd done this 1,000 times before. Elijah found himself dressed in borrowed clothes, Comanche leggings and a buckskin shirt. Someone had removed the broken shackle from his wrist while he slept, filing through the metal with patient precision. His wrist was bandaged now, the wounds clean. Chief Tanaka approached, Little Thunder beside him as always. The boy carried something wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it and held it up, a hunting knife in a beaded sheath. He offered it to Elijah, speaking rapidly in Comanche. Grey Owl translated. "The boy says you go into battle without weapons. This is his knife. His father gave it to him on his 7th winter. He wants you to have it, so you can protect yourself like you protected him." Elijah took the knife carefully, feeling its weight. The blade was sharp, the handle worn smooth from use. Tell him I'll take care of it, and when this is done, I'll give it back." But Little Thunder shook his head vigorously when Grey Owl translated. He said something firm, then turned and ran back to his father. "He says it's yours now," Grey Owl explained. "Gift given is gift kept, Comanche way." They mounted up as the sun cleared the horizon, 20 Comanche warriors plus Elijah and Grey Owl. Chief Tanaka led from the front, his headdress streaming behind him like a banner. Little Thunder stayed at the camp with the women, much to his visible frustration. They rode hard, covering ground with speed that amazed Elijah. The horses seemed tireless, and the warriors sat their saddles like they'd been born there. Elijah's borrowed mare kept pace, responding to his inexperienced commands with patient tolerance. As they rode, Gray Owl told him stories of the Comanche, of their battles with the Mexicans and the Texas Rangers, of their sacred places and their gods. The stories painted a picture of a people who valued freedom above all else, who'd rather die fighting than live in chains. "We understand your people," Gray Owl said. "The White Eyes try to put us on reservations, try to make us live like them, try to chain us with invisible chains. We say no. Better to die free than live as slaves." What happens after?" Elijah asked. "After we free them?" "That's for you to decide. The chief will offer safe passage to Mexico for those who want it, or they can stay with us if they wish. Some might go north toward the territories where slavery is forbidden. The choice is theirs. And me?" Gray Owl looked at him with those knowing eyes. "The chief has offered you a place with us. You saved his son. That makes you Comanche if you want to be. But I think you have unfinished business in the world of the White Eyes." Elijah thought of Sarah, of his son, of 50 people who'd spent their whole lives in bondage. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I do." By midday, the land began to change. The desert gave way to grassland, rolling hills dotted with mesquite and oak. They were getting close to Grimshaw's territory, close to the plantation where Elijah had spent 15 years of his life. Chief Tanaka called a halt at the top of a rise. Below, in a valley cut by a narrow creek, lay the slave camp. Elijah could see the wagons circled like a fortress, the armed guards patrolling the perimeter, the huddled figures of the enslaved people working in the fields despite the heat. His hands tightened on the reins. Somewhere down there was the man who'd beaten him, starved him, sold his son. Somewhere down there was Caleb Grimshaw. The chief spoke, his voice low and dangerous. Gray Owl translated. "The chief says we wait for darkness. Then we strike. He says you stay back, let the warriors do their work, but I think he knows you won't listen." Elijah smiled grimly. "You think right." They waited as the sun crawled across the sky, as shadows lengthened and the temperature dropped. The Comanche warriors prepared themselves in silence, painting their faces, checking their weapons one last time. Chief Tanaka knelt and spoke to the earth, a prayer in his language that needed no translation. When full darkness fell and the moon was nothing but a thin sliver, they moved. The Comanche descended the hillside like vengeful spirits, their horses' hooves wrapped in leather to muffle sound. Elijah rode in the middle of the group, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. The borrowed knife hung at his belt, and though he'd never killed a man before, he knew tonight might change that. The slave camp sprawled below them, illuminated by scattered campfires. Elijah could make out the guard rotations, patterns he'd memorized during his years of captivity. 6 armed men, all white, all carrying rifles. Caleb Grimshaw would be in his tent at the far end, probably drunk on whiskey and self-importance. Chief Tanaka raised his hand, and the war party stopped just beyond the firelight's reach. He spoke in low tones to his warriors, gesturing toward different sections of the camp. They nodded, understanding flowing between them without need for lengthy explanation. Gray Owl leaned close to Elijah. "The chief says 2 warriors will handle the guards on the north side, 2 more on the south. The rest of us go for the chains. When you hear the owl call, that's the signal. Move fast, stay low, and for the love of all spirits, don't hesitate." "What about Grimshaw? What about him?" "He needs to answer for what he's done." Gray Owl's expression hardened. "Then when you find him, you make him answer. Comanche don't judge how debts are paid." The warriors dispersed, melting into the darkness like smoke. Elijah watched them go, marveling at their silence. These were men who'd learned to hunt buffalo across open plains, to raid Mexican villages, and vanish before dawn. A slave camp was child's play, The owl call came soft and eerie, barely distinguishable from the real thing. Elijah kicked his horse forward, following Chief Tenaka toward the cluster of wagons where the enslaved people slept. His hands shook, but not from fear, from rage that had been building for 15 years. The first guard died without a sound, a Comanche arrow through his throat before he could raise his rifle. The second managed to shout, but his warning turned into a gurgle as a lance found his chest. Then chaos erupted. The Comanche swept into the camp like a wildfire, their war cries splitting the night. Elijah heard gunshots, screams, the clash of metal on metal. He dismounted near the supply wagon where he knew the shackle keys were kept and smashed the lock with a rock. Enslaved people began emerging from their shelters, confusion and terror on their faces. They saw the painted warriors and thought they'd traded one nightmare for another. "It's me!" Elijah shouted. "It's Elijah. We're here to free you." Recognition dawned on familiar faces. Sarah pushed her way to the front, her eyes wide with disbelief. She was thinner than he remembered, her dress little more than rags, but she was alive. God, she was alive. "Elijah," she whispered. "They said you were dead. They said the dogs got you." "I'm hard to kill," he said, grabbing the keys and starting on her shackles. The iron fell away with a satisfying click. "Listen to me. Get everyone moving. Head west, follow the Comanche. They'll take you somewhere safe." "The Comanche? Elijah, are you—" "Trust me, Sarah. I promise you, trust me." Around them, the camp descended into pandemonium. Grimshaw's men were fighting back now, firing wildly into the darkness. One bullet whizzed past Elijah's head, close enough he felt the heat. He grabbed Sarah and pushed her behind the wagon. More enslaved people crowded around, and Elijah worked the keys furiously, unlocking shackles as fast as his shaking hands could manage. Each person freed joined in, helping others, passing the keys along, a chain reaction of liberation. Chief Tanaka appeared through the smoke, blood on his war paint, his lance dripping red. He barked orders in Comanche, and his warriors began forming a protective circle around the freed people, shields raised against incoming fire. "Where's the man who owns this place?" the chief demanded through Grey Owl, who'd materialized beside him. "His tent," Elijah said, pointing. "The big one, with the flag." The chief's eyes gleamed in the firelight. He said something sharp, and Grey Owl nodded. "The chief says this is your kill, if you want it, your debt to settle." Elijah looked at Sarah, at the other freed people scrambling for safety, at the chaos and carnage around him. He thought about 15 years of bondage, of his son's face the day they took him away, of every lash and insult and degradation he'd endured. Then he thought about the man he wanted to be. "No," he said. "Let him run. Let him live knowing he lost everything." The chief regarded him for a long moment, then nodded once. He spoke again, and Grey Owl translated. "He says you have wisdom beyond your years, but if the slave master raises his weapon, all promises are void." They moved toward Grimshaw's tent as a group, the chief, Grey Owl, Elijah, and 4 Comanche warriors. The sounds of battle were dying down now, Grimshaw's men either dead or fled. The enslaved people were streaming toward the western hills, guided by Comanche outriders. Caleb Grimshaw stood outside his tent with a rifle in his hands, his face purple with rage and fear. He was a big man, thick around the middle from too much food and drink, with a grey beard that he kept oiled and perfected. The rifle shook in his grip. "You!" he spat when he saw Elijah. "You ungrateful, thieving—" "Shut your mouth," Elijah said quietly. "You got nothing to say I want to hear." "I'll kill you! I'll kill every last one of you savages!" Grimshaw swung the rifle toward the chief. Chief Tanaka moved faster than a man his size should be able to. His hand blurred, and suddenly a throwing axe was embedded in the rifle's stock, tearing it from Grimshaw's grip. The gun clattered to the ground. Grimshaw stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet. He fell hard on his backside, scrambling in the dirt like a terrified child. All his bravado evaporated, replaced by naked fear. "Please," he whimpered. "Please, I got money. Gold. It's in the tent. Take it. Take whatever you want." Elijah walked forward slowly, and Grimshaw's eyes followed him with the attention of a rabbit watching a snake. "You took my son," Elijah said, each word precise. "You took him and sold him south, and you laughed about it, said you got a good price. Do you remember?" Grimshaw's mouth worked soundlessly. "His name was Thomas. He was 7 years old, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to find him." He crouched down so he was eye level with Grimshaw, close enough to smell the whiskey on the man's breath, the fear sweat soaking his clothes. "I should kill you," Elijah said. "The Comanche would let me. Hell, they'd help. But I ain't gonna do that, because I ain't you. I ain't never gonna be you." He stood and turned his back on Caleb Grimshaw, walking toward where Sarah waited with the other freed people. "But if I ever see you again," Elijah called over his shoulder, "if you ever come looking for any of us, I'll let the Comanche have you, and they ain't as forgiving as I am." Behind him, Grimshaw sobbed into the dirt. They rode through the night, 50 freed people and 20 Comanche warriors, moving west toward territories where slavery's reach didn't extend. Some people rode double on horses, others walked, but they all moved with purpose. Every step away from that camp was a step toward something they'd only dreamed about. Sarah rode beside Elijah, her hand gripping his tightly. Neither of them spoke much. There'd be time for words later, for processing what had happened, for planning what came next. Right now it was enough to be together, to be free, to be alive. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Chief Tanaka rode up alongside them. Little Thunder sat in front of him, the boy having been waiting at a rendezvous point with the women. The chief spoke, and Grey Owl translated. "The chief says there is a village 3 days' ride from here, near the Rio Grande. The Mexicans there are friendly to Comanche, friendly to anyone fleeing the white eyes. He will guide your people there, make sure they're safe. After that, the choice is yours." "What happens to you?" Sarah asked, looking at Elijah. He looked at the chief, at Little Thunder, at the vast Texas landscape stretching in every direction. He thought about freedom, real freedom, the kind he'd never known existed before a Comanche boy fell into quicksand. "I got unfinished business," Elijah said. "I got a son to find. But first, I'm going to make sure every person here gets settled somewhere safe." The chief nodded approvingly and spoke again. "The chief says when you're ready to search for your son, come find us. He will give you horses, supplies, warriors if you need them. A life debt isn't paid with just one act. It's paid over time with honor and trust." Little Thunder leaned forward and said something in Comanche, his young voice serious. Everyone turned to look at him. Grey Owl smiled. "The boy says you are his second father now, the father who pulled him from death. He says in Comanche tradition that makes you family. Blood of blood, spirit of spirit." Elijah felt his throat tighten. He reached out and ruffled Little Thunder's hair, the way he used to do with Thomas. Tell him I'm honored." They rode on as the sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a furnace. But this time Elijah didn't feel the heat. He felt only the wind on his face, Sarah's hand in his, and the weight of possibility stretching before him like an open road. Somewhere behind them, Caleb Grimshaw's camp burned, sending black smoke into the clear blue sky. A marker, a message, a warning to everyone who believed some people were meant to be owned. Freedom, Elijah thought, wasn't something given or granted or bestowed. It was something taken, fought for, bled for. It was something that had to be won over and over again, every single day. And today, 50 people had won their share. The journey to the Rio Grande took 4 days instead of 3. Chief Tanaka set a measured pace, allowing the freed people to rest when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them. Many of them had never ridden horses before, had never traveled more than a few miles from the plantations where they'd been born. Every muscle ached, every joint protested, but they pushed forward because going back wasn't an option. Elijah rode at the front with the chief most days, learning Comanche words for basic things: water, food, danger, friend. Little Thunder appointed himself teacher, chattering in a mixture of Comanche and the few English words he'd picked up, pointing at clouds and rocks and animals, expecting Elijah to repeat the words until he got them right. Sarah rode in the middle of the group with the other women, helping care for the children and elderly. She'd found her voice again, the one that had been beaten down by years of servitude. Elijah heard her singing sometimes, old songs from before, songs his mother used to sing in the tobacco fields of Georgia. On the second night, they made camp in a grove of pecan trees beside a creek that ran clear and cold from some hidden spring. The Comanche women showed the freed people how to find edible plants, how to set snares for rabbits, how to move through the land without leaving tracks, survival skills that might mean the difference between life and death if they ever found themselves alone. Grey Owl sat with Elijah by the fire after the evening meal, smoking a pipe that smelled of sweet tobacco and herbs. "You're quiet," the old warrior observed, "since we left the burning camp." "Thinking too much makes a man old before his time. Thinking about what comes next," Elijah admitted. "We get these people to the village, get them settled. Then what? I got to find my son, but I don't even know where to start. They could have sold him anywhere from Louisiana to Alabama." "Then you start in Louisiana," Grey Owl said simply. "You search plantation by plantation, town by town. You ask questions. You follow rumors. Eventually you find him. Could take years. Good things usually do." Elijah poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks spiral into the darkness. "What if I don't find him? What if he's dead, or sold somewhere I can't reach, or—" "Then you tried," Grey Owl interrupted. "You gave everything you had. The spirits recognize effort even when it fails. Your son will know, wherever he is, that you looked for him. That matters." A figure approached from the darkness, and Elijah looked up to see Chief Tanaka. The chief spoke, gesturing for Elijah to follow. Grey Owl stood as well, translating as they walked away from the main camp into the trees. They came to a small clearing where Little Thunder waited with 2 other Comanche children, all of them armed with small bows. The chief said something, and Little Thunder stepped forward, offering his bow to Elijah. "The chief wants to teach you to shoot," Grey Owl explained. "He says a man traveling alone needs to know how to hunt, how to defend himself. The knife is good for close work, but distance weapons keep you alive longer." Elijah took the bow, feeling its weight. It was smaller than the warrior's bows, but still required strength to draw. The chief demonstrated the stance, the grip, how to nock an arrow and sight along its length. Then he stepped back and indicated a tree about 30 paces away. Elijah's first shot went wide, disappearing into the brush. His second buried itself in the dirt, 5 feet short. Little Thunder giggled, earning a sharp look from his father that quickly silenced him. "Don't think," Grey Owl advised. "The white eyes think too much. They calculate distance, wind, all these things. Comanche feel. We become the arrow. We see where it wants to go." It sounded like mystical nonsense, but Elijah tried anyway. He cleared his mind, focused on the tree, imagined the arrow's flight. He drew, held his breath, and released. The arrow struck the tree with a solid thunk, not center mass, but close enough to count. Little Thunder whooped and clapped his hands. The chief nodded once, something that might have been approval flickering across his stoic features. They practiced until the moon was high, Elijah's arms burning from the effort, but his accuracy improving with each shot. When they finally returned to camp, the chief placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder and spoke. "He says you learn fast," Grey Owl translated. "Like Comanche. He says when you go looking for your son, you go as warrior, not as slave. Warriors don't give up. They hunt until the hunt is done." That night, Elijah slept better than he had in days. Not because the ground was any softer or the air any warmer, but because for the first time since escaping, he felt like he had a path forward. Not just running from something, but moving towards something, purpose. That's what the Comanche had given him, along with freedom. A reason to keep breathing. The village appeared on the morning of the fourth day, nestled in a valley where the Rio Grande carved a wide, lazy path through the landscape. It wasn't much, maybe 20 buildings of adobe and wood, with a church at the center and fields of corn and beans spreading out from the settlement. Mexican and American flags flew side by side, a border town that acknowledged both nations and served neither. The villagers came out to meet them, wary at first when they saw the Comanche warriors. But Chief Tanaka had been here before, had trading relationships with these people. The village elder, a weathered man named Don Miguel, embraced the chief like a brother. When he saw the 50 freed people, understanding dawned on his face. He turned to his people and spoke rapid Spanish, and suddenly the entire village mobilized. Women brought food and water. Men began clearing buildings that could serve as temporary shelter. Children stared with wide eyes at the newcomers, these black people who'd arrived with the Comanche, a combination they'd never seen before. Don Miguel spoke English with a thick accent, learned from years of trading with Texans who came south of the border. He pulled Elijah aside while the others were being settled. "The chief told me what you did," Don Miguel said, "saving his boy. Very brave. Very stupid, maybe, but brave." Didn't feel brave at the time, felt necessary. The best acts usually do. Don Miguel gestured at the village. "You and your people can stay as long as you need. We have work if you want it. The cotton fields need hands. The construction needs workers. We pay fair wages, real money. Some of your people might want to keep moving, head further into Mexico or up north to the territories. That's their choice. But they're safe here. I can't thank you enough. Thank the chief. He brought you here. We just offer shelter." Don Miguel paused, studying Elijah's face. "You have the look of a man who's not staying, though. Where will you go?" "East. Back into Texas, then Louisiana. I'm looking for my son." Don Miguel's expression softened. "I have 3 sons. If someone took them from me, I would burn the world down to find them." He pulled a small leather pouch from his belt and pressed it into Elijah's hand. "Gold. Not much, but enough to get you started. Buy a horse, supplies, information when you need it. I can't accept. You can and you will. Consider it payment for the work you'll do in the next 2 days. We have a barn roof that needs repair, and I'm told you're handy with tools." Elijah smiled despite himself. "Who told you that?" "The chief. He notices things." Those 2 days in the village felt like a dream, a brief glimpse of what life could be like when people weren't divided by color or circumstance. The freed people began to relax, to smile, to imagine futures that didn't involve chains and masters. Some decided to stay in the village permanently. Others began making plans to keep moving, chasing rumors of communities in Mexico where freed slaves had built new lives. Sarah found work helping the village women with their weaving, her skilled hands producing cloth finer than anything they'd seen. She was good at it, and more importantly, she was happy. Elijah watched her laugh one evening, really laugh. The sound so unexpected and beautiful, it made his chest ache. He knew what he had to do, even though it would hurt them both. On the evening of the second day, he found her sitting by the river, her feet dangling in the cool water. He sat beside her, and for a while they just watched the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "You're leaving," Sarah said finally. It wasn't a question. "I have to find Thomas." "I know. I've always known." She turned to look at him, tears shining in her eyes but not falling. "I used to pray you'd find a way to get to him, bring him back to us. Now I pray you just find him alive, wherever he is." "Come with me," Elijah said, though he knew what she'd say. She shook her head. "I can't, Elijah. I can't go back to that world, even to search. I spent 15 years in hell. I'm finally free. If I go back, even just to look, I'm afraid I'll never get out again." "I understand." "Do you?" The tears fell now, tracking down her cheeks. Do you understand that I love you and I love our son, but I can't sacrifice the freedom I just found? Does that make me selfish? Makes you human." He took her hand. "Stay here. Build a life. Be happy. When I find Thomas, I'll bring him back here, to you, to home. And if you don't find him, then I'll keep looking until I do, or until I can't look anymore. Either way, you deserve peace. You've earned it." They held each other as the sun set and the first stars appeared, both of them crying now, mourning what they'd lost and what they were losing and what they hoped to find again someday. Chief Tenaka and his warriors left the next morning, heading back to their territory. Before they departed, the chief called Elijah to him. Through Grey Owl, he spoke for several minutes, his hand resting on Little Thunder's shoulder. "The chief says you ride with honor in your heart," Grey Owl translated. "He says, when you find your son, you bring him to our camp. Let him meet the boy whose life his father saved. Let him see that courage and kindness create bonds stronger than blood." Little Thunder stepped forward and embraced Elijah fiercely, the way children do when they don't understand that this might be goodbye forever. When he pulled back, he said something in Comanche, his young voice thick with emotion. He says, "You are So-T now, he who pulled life from death." He says the name will protect you on your journey, because names have power. The chief reached up and removed a small amulet from around his neck, a piece of turquoise wrapped in silver wire. He placed it around Elijah's neck. "For protection," Grey Owl said. "And so you remember who you are now, not a slave, not even just a free man, a warrior with purpose." Elijah touched the amulet, feeling its weight settle against his chest. "Tell the chief I'll never forget what he's done. For me, for all of us, I owe him more than I can ever repay," Grey Owl translated, and the chief smiled, the first real smile Elijah had seen on his face. "He says the debt is balanced. You saved his son. He saved you. Now you're even, and you're friends. Friendship has no debt, only duty, the duty to remember, to honor, to return if needed." The Comanche rode out in a thunder of hooves, Little Thunder turning in his saddle to wave until they disappeared over the horizon. Elijah stood at the edge of the village, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. Somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of the south, his son was waiting. Whether Thomas knew Elijah was coming didn't matter. The search itself mattered. The trying mattered. He thought about the chief's words. Warrior with purpose. He liked that. It felt true in a way nothing else ever had. Don Miguel approached with a horse, a sturdy mare with intelligent eyes. "Her name is Luna," he said. "She's good in bad terrain, doesn't spook easy, and she's fast when you need her to be. She's yours." "Don Miguel!" "No arguments. You have a long journey ahead. You'll need a good horse." Sarah came last, carrying a pack filled with supplies. Dried meat, water skins, a blanket, the gold Don Miguel had given him, plus some she'd saved from her work. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. Promise me you'll come back, even if you don't find him. Promise me you won't disappear into that darkness looking for him." Elijah pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. "I promise. When this is done, one way or another, I'm coming home." He mounted Luna, settled his pack, and turned the mare east, toward the rising sun, toward the plantations and slave markets and all the horrors he'd left behind. But this time, he rode as So-T, he who pulled life from death. And death, he figured, had better get out of his way. The first plantation Elijah searched was a cotton operation outside of San Augustine, Texas. He posed as a freedman looking for work, kept his head down, asked subtle questions. The overseer was suspicious, but desperate for hands with harvest season approaching. Elijah worked alongside the enslaved people for 3 days, learning names, hearing stories, searching every face for one that might be Thomas's. The boy wasn't there. Nobody had heard of him. Elijah moved on. The second plantation was larger, near Nacogdoches. The owner was a woman, a widow who'd inherited the operation from her husband and ran it with iron efficiency. She didn't trust Elijah. wouldn't let him near the slave quarters, wouldn't answer his questions about purchases from 5 years ago. He learned nothing except what suspicion looked like on a white woman's face. By the 6th plantation, Elijah had developed a system. He'd approach at dusk, offering to work for food and shelter. He'd listen at night when the enslaved people gathered, when they told stories of who'd been sold where, who'd arrived from what market. The South had its own underground network of information, passed whisper to whisper between people who had nothing but each other. In a small town called Marshall, he heard the first promising lead. An old woman named Ruth, who sold vegetables at the market, remembered a boy matching Thomas's description passing through 5 years ago. She'd seen him on a wagon headed east toward Louisiana. Shreveport, she thought, or maybe Monroe. He was crying, Ruth said softly, her weathered hands sorting through collard greens. Kept calling for his mama and daddy. Broke my heart, but what could I do? I got no power, no voice. I just remember faces, hold them in my heart. Hope someday somebody comes looking. Elijah thanked her and bought every vegetable she had, leaving extra coins in her basket when she wasn't looking. He crossed into Louisiana on a cold October morning, the air thick with moisture that made his clothes stick to his skin. This was different territory, deeper south, where slavery had roots that went back generations. The plantations here were massive, some of them spanning thousands of acres, worked by hundreds of enslaved people. Finding one boy in this vastness felt impossible. But Elijah had made a promise. He stopped in Shreveport first, a river town bustling with commerce and cruelty in equal measure. Slave auctions happened every Wednesday in the town square. Human beings sold like cattle, while respectable people walked past without a second glance. Elijah watched one auction from a distance, his stomach churning. A woman separated from her children. A man in his prime sold to a plantation 3 states away. Children, some barely old enough to walk, inspected like livestock. He wanted to burn it all down. Instead, he took notes. The auctioneers kept records. If Thomas had passed through here, there'd be documentation. Breaking into the auction house proved easier than expected. The lock was old, the building poorly maintained. Elijah slipped in after midnight, using the skills he'd learned from other freedmen about how to move unseen through a hostile world. The records were kept in a back room, thousands of pages listing names, ages, physical descriptions, prices paid, buyers' names. Elijah worked through them by candlelight, his eyes burning, his hands shaking every time he turned a page. There, Thomas Boone, age 7, sold to one Matthias Duchamp, plantation owner near Monroe, Louisiana. Date of sale, November 1840. 5 years ago, almost to the day. Elijah's vision blurred. He'd found him. After months of searching, after countless dead ends and false leads, he'd found where his son had been taken. He copied down the information, replaced the records exactly as he'd found them, and slipped back into the night. Luna waited where he'd left her, and they rode hard toward Monroe, following the road that paralleled the Ouachita River. The Duchamp plantation sprawled across the river bottomland, fields of cotton stretching to the horizon. The main house stood on a small rise, a columned monstrosity that tried to look sophisticated, but mostly looked like money built on human suffering. Elijah couldn't just ride up and ask for his son. If Duchamp discovered a formerly enslaved man looking for his child, it would end badly. He needed to be smart, careful, patient. He found work at a neighboring plantation, a smaller operation owned by a man named Beauregard, who needed help with his horses. Elijah's skill with Luna had improved significantly over his months of travel, and Beauregard was impressed enough to hire him for a few weeks. "You seem educated for a Negro," Beauregard commented on the second day, watching Elijah gentle a skittish mare. "Where'd you learn to work horses like that?" "Comanche taught me," Elijah said carefully. "Worked for them for a while out west." "Comanche? Beauregard's eyebrows rose. Well, I'll be damned. Thought they scalped colored folks same as whites. Depends on the Comanche. From Beauregard's plantation, Elijah could see the Duchamp place across the river. He watched the work crews come and go, studied the patterns, looked for a boy who'd be 12 now, almost a man by the standards of the South. On the 4th day, he saw him. Thomas was taller than Elijah expected, his child's body stretching toward adolescence. He worked in the fields with the other boys his age, his movements efficient but weary. Even from a distance, Elijah recognized the way he held his head, the angle of his shoulders, Sarah's features mixed with his own, creating someone unique and precious and stolen. Elijah's hands tightened on the fence rail he was leaning against. His son was alive. He was right there, a quarter-mile away, breathing the same air. "That's Duchamp's place," Beauregard said, appearing beside him. "You got business over there?" "Just looking at the river. It's peaceful." Duchamp's a hard man, works his people near to death. Lost 3 last year to fever, 2 more to exhaustion. But he grows fine cotton, I'll give him that. Money trumps mercy in this business. That night, Elijah lay awake, planning. He couldn't buy Thomas, didn't have nearly enough gold. He couldn't fight his way into the plantation and take him, not against Duchamp's armed overseers. He needed something else, something clever. The answer came from an unexpected source. Beauregard's daughter, Emily, a girl of 16 who'd taken an interest in Elijah's stories about the Comanche. She approached him one morning while he was mucking stalls. "My father says you knew Indians out west," she said, her curiosity overcoming her proper Southern manners. What were they like? Elijah considered how to answer. He'd learned over the past months that white people in the South had strange ideas about the Comanche, viewing them as either noble savages or murderous demons depending on their politics. "They were people," he said finally. "Good and bad, kind and cruel, just like anybody else. But they valued freedom above everything. Couldn't stand the idea of living in chains. Do you value freedom, Elijah?" The question caught him off guard. He looked at this white girl, so young and privileged, asking about things she couldn't possibly understand. More than anything in this world. Emily nodded slowly. "I have a brother," she said quietly. "Had a brother. He ran away 3 years ago, went north. Father's never spoken his name since, but I think about him every day, wonder if he's safe, if he's happy." She looked at Elijah directly, and he saw intelligence in her eyes that reminded him of Sarah. "I see you watching the Duchamp plantation. You're looking for someone, aren't you?" Elijah froze. If she told her father, if word got to Duchamp. "I won't tell," Emily said quickly, "but I might be able to help. Mr. Duchamp owes my father money, gambling debts. Father's been trying to collect for months. Maybe we could work something out. Why would you help me?" "Because I know what it's like to lose someone you love to this system, and because it's the right thing to do." She smiled sadly. "There aren't many opportunities for rightness in this world. I'll take the ones I get." The negotiation took 3 weeks. Beauregard, prompted by his daughter in ways Elijah never fully understood, agreed to forgive half of Duchamp's debt in exchange for 1 slave. A boy named Thomas, age 12, good worker, no trouble-making history. Duchamp grumbled but agreed. A slave was a slave, and wiping out gambling debt was worth more than sentiment. The transfer happened on a grey November morning, the anniversary of the day Thomas had been sold away from Elijah. The boy was brought across the river on a flat-bottomed boat, his wrists in shackles, his face carefully blank in the way enslaved people learned to hide their emotions from their masters. Elijah stood behind the barn, out of sight, watching as Beauregard signed the papers and Thomas was officially transferred to his ownership. "Take those shackles off," Beauregard ordered his overseer. "Boys worked hard, no need for that." The shackles fell away, and Thomas rubbed his wrists, still not showing any emotion. He'd learned that lesson too well. Beauregard turned to Emily. "Your project, daughter. You wanted him for the house staff. He's yours to train." Emily nodded and approached Thomas. She spoke too softly for Elijah to hear, But Thomas's eyes widened. He looked around wildly, confused, afraid. Then Emily pointed toward the barn. Thomas saw him. For a moment neither of them moved. Father and son, separated by 5 years and an ocean of trauma, staring at each other across a distance that seemed unbridgeable. Then Thomas ran. He crossed the yard in seconds, stumbling over his own feet, and threw himself into Elijah's arms. The impact nearly knocked Elijah over, but he caught his son, held him tight, felt the boy's body shake with sobs that had been held back for far too long. "Daddy!" Thomas gasped against his shoulder. "Daddy, is it really you? They said you were dead. They said I'd never see you again." "I'm here," Elijah whispered, his own tears falling freely. "I'm here, son. I'm so sorry it took so long. I'm so damn sorry." They held each other while the world continued around them. Beauregard watched from a distance, something complicated crossing his face. Emily smiled, satisfied, and walked back toward the house. When they finally separated, Elijah cupped his son's face in his hands, taking in every detail. Thomas had his mother's eyes, his grandmother's nose, his father's stubborn jaw. He was beautiful and broken and alive. "We're leaving," Elijah said. "Tonight. Soon as it's dark. I know a place across the Rio Grande. Your mama's there waiting. We're going home, Thomas. We're going home." They left at midnight, riding Luna double. Beauregard had been generous, providing a second horse, supplies, and gold. He'd also given them a letter, a document stating that Thomas had been freed by his owner. It wouldn't mean much in Texas, where slave catchers didn't care about paperwork, but it was something. "Emily told me what you did," Beauregard had said when Elijah came to thank him. "Don't thank me, thank her. Girl's got more moral sense than her old man. Guess she gets it from her mother. Why did you help?" Beauregard looked out at his fields, at the enslaved people working them, at the empire built on their backs. "Because I'm tired," he said finally. "Tired of this system. Tired of pretending it's sustainable. Tired of looking in the mirror and seeing someone I don't recognize. I can't fix the whole world, but I could fix this one small thing, so I did." Now, riding west under a canopy of stars, Elijah told Thomas everything. About escaping Grimshaw's plantation, about pulling Little Thunder from the Quicksand, about the Comanche attack and the 50 people freed. Thomas listened, his arms wrapped tight around his father's waist, occasionally asking questions. "So we're going to Mexico, just across the border, little town where your mama's waiting. After that, wherever we want. North to the territories, maybe, or deeper into Mexico. Hell, maybe all the way to California. World's bigger than we ever knew, son. We can go anywhere. Are the Comanche really as fierce as people say?" Elijah smiled. "Fiercer, but they're also honorable. Little Thunder, the chief's son, he's about your age. Smart kid, brave. I promised I'd bring you to meet him someday." "I'd like that." They rode through Texas without incident, avoiding towns, sleeping during the day and traveling at night. Elijah taught Thomas the things the Comanche had taught him: how to find water in the desert, how to read the stars, how to hunt with a bow, how to move like a ghost through hostile territory. Thomas soaked it all up, eager to learn, eager to become something other than what 5 years of slavery had made him. He was quiet sometimes, retreating into memories Elijah couldn't reach. But slowly, over days of travel and conversation, the boy began to emerge from behind his protective shell. On their 5th night riding, they stopped at a creek to water the horses. Thomas sat on a rock, staring at the water flowing past. "I used to dream about you coming for me," he said softly, "every night for the first year. I'd close my eyes and imagine you riding up on a big horse, breaking my chains, taking me away. Then, after a while, I stopped dreaming, started thinking maybe it was better to forget, to accept that this was my life forever." Elijah sat beside him. "I never stopped looking. Never stopped believing I'd find you. I know that now. But there were days, Daddy, Days where I thought about giving up, thought about walking into the river and just letting it take me. The words hit Elijah like a physical blow. His 12-year-old son had contemplated ending his life. What kind of system created that level of despair in a child? "You survived," Elijah said, pulling Thomas close. "That took more courage than anything I've ever done. You kept breathing when you had every reason to stop. You're the bravest person I know." "I'm scared, though. Scared that even though we're free now, some part of me will always be back there, always be that boy in chains." "Maybe, probably. Trauma doesn't just disappear because circumstances change. But here's what I learned from the Comanche. We're not defined by what happened to us. We're defined by what we do next. You can carry those memories and still build something beautiful. They don't have to own you just because they happened to you." Thomas nodded, processing. Then he said something that nearly broke Elijah's heart. "I'm scared. Mama won't recognize me. I'm not the same boy she remembers. She's not the same woman either. None of us are the same. We're all changed, all scarred. But we're family, and family finds a way back to each other." They reached the Rio Grande on a morning so beautiful it hurt. The sun painted the water gold, and birds sang in the cottonwoods, and Mexico waited just across the river like a promise. They forded at a shallow point, the horses picking their way carefully across the rocky bottom. When they reached the far bank and climbed out, Thomas turned back to look at Texas, at the country of his birth and his bondage. "I'm never going back there," he said firmly. "No matter what happens, I'm never going back." "You never have to," Elijah promised. The village appeared at noon, exactly as Elijah remembered it. Thomas tensed when he saw it, his body going rigid with old fears. Elijah understood. Towns, villages, anywhere people gathered meant danger for someone who'd spent their life as property. "It's safe," Elijah assured him. "These are good people. Don Miguel, the elder, he helped us. And your mama's here. She's waiting." Sarah was working in the communal garden when they rode in. She didn't see them at first, focused on pulling weeds from between rows of beans. Then someone pointed and she looked up. The expression on her face when she saw Thomas was something Elijah would remember for the rest of his life. Joy and disbelief and love so intense it seemed to physically hurt her. She dropped her basket and ran. Thomas slid off Luna's back and met her halfway. Mother and son collided in an embrace that seemed to defy physics, holding each other so tightly it looked like they might merge into one person. Elijah dismounted but kept his distance, giving them this moment. Don Miguel appeared at his elbow. "You found him." "I did." "Good. That's very good." The old man watched the reunion, his weathered face soft with understanding. "She's been like a ghost since you left. Working, smiling, pretending. But her eyes were always elsewhere, always scanning the horizon. Now she can rest, so can I." The village celebrated that night, a feast that seemed excessive for the return of two people but felt perfectly appropriate. The freed people who'd stayed in the village came to hear Thomas's story, to meet the boy whose father had ridden into legend to find him. Musicians played guitars and fiddles. Children danced. For a few hours, the horrors of slavery felt distant, almost unreal. Chief Tanaka arrived the next morning with Little Thunder and a small group of warriors. Grey Owl was with them, looking older, but no less sharp. "Heard you were back," the chief said through Grey Owl. "Thought my son would want to meet yours." Little Thunder and Thomas regarded each other warily at first, separated by language and culture and experience. But Elijah had learned that children find ways to communicate that transcend words. Within an hour, they were teaching each other games, comparing hunting skills, laughing at jokes that made sense only to them. "Your son has strong spirit," the chief observed, watching them, "the kind that bends but doesn't break, like his father. He's been through hell. All the more impressive that he smiles. The truly strong are those who find joy despite suffering." That evening, the chief made a formal announcement. Thomas was to be adopted into the Comanche tribe as Little Thunder's brother, a symbolic gesture that created kinship bonds between families. In Comanche tradition, this meant Thomas would always have a place with the tribe, would always be welcome, would always be protected. "You saved my son," the chief said through Grey Owl. "Now your son is my son too. This is the Comanche way. Family grows not just through blood, but through action and honor." Thomas looked at Elijah, uncertainty in his eyes. Elijah nodded encouragement. This was a gift, a form of protection and belonging that transcended the systems that had tried to break them. Thomas stepped forward and accepted, bowing his head in respect. Little Thunder whooped and grabbed his new brother's hand, pulling him toward where the other Comanche children waited to welcome him. Sarah appeared beside Elijah, slipping her hand into his. "We made it," she whispered. "We're all here. We're free. We're together." "Yeah, we did. What now?" Elijah thought about it, about the village that had welcomed them, about the Comanche who'd made them family, about the vast world stretching in every direction. About the stories Ruth had told him of other freed people heading north, building communities in territories where slavery had no legal foothold. About the rumors of a railroad operated by abolitionists, helping people escape to Canada. About possibility. "Now we live," he said. "We build something. We help others the way we were helped. We make sure Thomas grows up knowing he's more than what they tried to make him. And if the slave catchers come, if people like Grimshaw come looking, then they'll learn what happens when you threaten family. We've got Comanche warriors who consider us kin. We've got a whole village willing to stand up. We've got ourselves, and we're not victims anymore. We're survivors. We're fighters." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I love you, Elijah Boone. I love you too." The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Elijah worked with Don Miguel, helping expand the village's irrigation system. Sarah continued her weaving, teaching others her skills. Thomas divided his time between the village children and Little Thunder, learning both Spanish and Comanche, growing stronger and more confident each day. One evening, a group of travelers arrived at the village. 5 freed people from Louisiana, following rumors of a safe place across the border. They were thin, exhausted, hunted. Don Miguel welcomed them without hesitation. Elijah listened to their stories around the fire that night, stories similar to his own: escape, pursuit, desperation, hope. He realized then that his story wasn't unique. There were hundreds, maybe thousands of people making these same desperate runs for freedom, and most of them didn't have a Comanche chief to help them. "We need to do more," he said to Sarah that night. "We can't just hide here while others suffer." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we use what we learned. The routes I took, the safe places I found, the contacts I made. We create a network, help people get from Louisiana to here, or to Mexico City, or up to the Northern Territories. Be a bridge." That's dangerous. So was pulling a boy from Quicksand. So was riding into a slave camp with Comanche warriors. Dangerous seems to be what I do. Sarah smiled. "Then I guess we're doing it together. Because I'm not letting you ride off into danger alone anymore." They started small. Word spread through the underground networks that existed among enslaved people. Whispered rumors of a tall black man who rode with the Comanche, who knew the safe paths west. Some called him Tsoti, others called him the Ghost of the Rio Grande. A few even started calling him the Liberator, though Elijah thought that was too grand. People began arriving, one at a time at first, then in small groups. The village absorbed them, gave them shelter and safety. Some stayed, others continued on, heading deeper into Mexico or north toward freedom. Each one carried stories back, stories of the man who'd saved a Comanche boy and received a miracle in return. On the anniversary of the night Elijah had pulled Little Thunder from the quicksand, Chief Tanaka returned to the village with his full band of warriors. He brought gifts, horses, weapons, supplies. But more than that, he brought a promise. "The Comanche will patrol these routes," Grey Owl translated for the chief. "We will watch for slave catchers, for those who would pursue freedom seekers. This is sacred work, helping people escape chains. It honors the spirits who value freedom above all else." Elijah clasped arms with the chief, a gesture of respect and gratitude that needed no translation. "You paid your debt long ago," Elijah said. "This is more than I could ever ask." "Debts are paid once," the chief replied through Grey Owl, "but friendship gives forever. You are Comanche now, in all ways that matter. Your fight is our fight." As the chief and his warriors rode away that evening, Elijah stood with Sarah and Thomas, watching them disappear into the desert sunset. Thomas leaned against his father, no longer the frightened boy he'd been, but not yet the man he'd become. "Tell me again," Thomas said, "about the day you saved Little Thunder." Elijah had told this story dozens of times now, to Thomas, to the freed people who arrived seeking hope, to anyone who asked. But he never tired of it, because it wasn't just a story about pulling a boy from quicksand. It was a story about how one act of compassion could change everything, could ripple outward like water, could free 50 people and give birth to a network that would help hundreds more. "I was running," Elijah began. "Running for my life, chains still on my wrists, dogs on my trail. The sun was hot enough to kill, and I had maybe a day left in me before I collapsed. Then I heard a cry." He told the story as the stars emerged, as the desert wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. He told it as a reminder that heroism wasn't about being fearless or powerful. It was about seeing someone drowning and choosing to jump in, even when you were drowning yourself. He told it as a promise that freedom, real freedom, was worth any sacrifice. And he told it as a legacy, something Thomas would carry forward, something he'd pass to his own children someday. The story of how a fugitive slave became a Comanche warrior, how mercy became thunder, how one choice in a Texas ravine changed the course of dozens of lives. That night, Elijah dreamed of his mother back in Georgia, of the tobacco fields where she'd raised him, of her voice teaching him the lesson that had saved his life and so many others. When you see someone drowning, you pull them out. He woke before dawn and walked to the edge of the village, looking east toward the land he'd fled. Somewhere out there, in the darkness that was slowly giving way to light, more people were running, more people were desperate, more people needed help. Elijah touched the turquoise amulet the chief had given him, feeling its weight, its promise of protection. Then he touched the knife Little Thunder had gifted him, the blade that had seen him through countless dangers. He was T, he who pulled life from death, and his work was far from finished. Behind him, the village began to stir. Sarah emerged from their home, Thomas beside her, both of them rubbing sleep from their eyes. Don Miguel started the morning fire. The freed people who'd arrived last week began their day, their first truly free days, days where they woke without fear of the lash. Elijah smiled. This was what freedom looked like. Not a destination, but a practice. Not something you achieved once and kept forever, but something you built and defended and shared, day after day, choice after choice. The sun broke over the horizon, flooding the desert with golden light. A new day, a new opportunity to pull someone from the quicksand. Elijah Boone, formerly enslaved, now free, turned back toward the village and walked into the light. His story was far from over. But this chapter, the chapter of finding his son, of building his family, of discovering his purpose, this chapter was complete. And somewhere in the vast Texas wilderness, the wind whispered his name in Comanche, Tsoti, Tsoti, Tsoti. The legend that mercy made, the ghost that freedom forged, the man who saved a child and changed the world.